just wanted to welcome you and begin with a couple of announcements in preparation for next week's session. I looked over the discussion questions for next week yesterday and discovered that question 2 has no question. So there's an interesting paragraph with a couple of ideas, one from Rabbi Kushner and from another theologian about some of the text from Job, but I neglected to ask the question should be, what do you think about this? And we can take off from there. But that one, and then there is one piece where I'm looking for a volunteer reader. So if you like to read, please look at that and you'll see it in the lesson 5. And in addition, my first discussion question invites you to share with us any other passages. This is a particularly rich section, the chapters that we're reading, with some beautiful language. And if you would like to read something else in addition to the one I selected, I will be inviting volunteers to offer a passage. I'd say keep it sort of around 10, 12 verses, something, so that we can have several people offering to read. That's all. With that, I'll turn it over to Gordon for lesson 4.
Well, good morning, everybody. Yes, I'll just punctuate what Jean said. How about this very typical March Colorado weather we have today? I've already done 2 shovels today, and I think after I'm done here, I'm going to have to go do number 3, because you don't want it to get too deep, because probably die out there on my driveway. We're starting chapter 4, this is Lent 4. And before I forget, following up on our practice we initiated last week, we'll be recording the session up until we do our discussion questions, just to allow folks to speak freely and honestly during the discussion. And so we'll record the regular part of the class and then turn off the recording when we begin our discussion questions. So up until now, the discussion among Job and his friends has been reasonably polite. I was thinking about it as stepping into a pool with different levels, and we started with the fable, and so we're in the shallow end of the pool, no worries, no problems. And now as we progress through the book of Job, we're stepping into deeper and deeper water, we're not physically stepping into deeper water, but spiritually and allegorically, I guess you could say, we're really getting into the heart of the book. And I think that's exciting. As I've reread all of this, I get more out of it every time I read it. But now, this time, the argument's going to get personal and the gloves come off. Job's friends have been reasonable and sympathetic up until now, but they are frankly puzzled and they're frustrated by Job's reluctance to accept their advice. They've advised Job, hold on to your faith, trust in God, and there will be a happy ending. And this is, by the way, the theology of the fable. Righteousness doesn't win every round. Mischief and misfortune do their damage, but if we are patient, we will ultimately see justice prevail. Seems like pretty wise words, eh? Well, Job stubbornly refuses to listen. His friends are astounded. His friends ask, what is wrong with Job that he can't see the merit of what we, these wise men, are saying? Eliphaz, remember, he is the eldest of the 3 friends, steps up for another round of trying to convince Job that his anger is misplaced and God will forgive him. Eliphaz's patience is wearing thin, however, and he accuses Job of arrogance born of immaturity. What do you know that we don't know? Among us are gray-haired men, older than your father, and therefore older than you, by the way. Job's stubbornness and arrogance seems to be proof of his faith sinfulness. Eliphaz must be thinking, you young whippersnapper. I'm sure they didn't have that word back then, but it sounds good. You are so immature and arrogant. Eliphaz warns Job that the man who rebels against God, presumably against the traditional understanding of God, calls down punishment on himself as bad as anything God might do to him. You think you got it bad now, Job? Just wait and see what God will do if you don't give up your self-righteousness. And there's a really nice quote from Job, chapter 15, 30, 22, and 24, 25. The wicked man writhes in torment all his days. He is never sure he will come back from the dark. Troubles terrify him. Anxiety overpowers him. Like a king expecting a siege, for he has raised his arm against God. I'd be shaking in my boots, but no, Job, not persuaded. In fact, he scorns their advice. I've heard many such things. Miserable comforters are you all. Have windy words no limit? Or what provokes you that you keep on talking? Talk, talk, talk. Right over my head. He ignores Eliphaz. His quarrel isn't with him or his other friends. It's with God. And Job turns directly to God. Surely now my witness is in heaven. He who can testify for me is on high. Let him arbitrate between man and God as between one man and another. And once again, as was stated in last week in chapter 9, verse 33, Job seems to be seeking some entity more powerful than God, some sort of cosmic law of justice, which God, even God, could respect. Like that this arbitrator could be an umpire between him and God. He also seems to be saying, besides being judge and jury, God is also the witness to Job's defense. If Job could summon God, God would testify to his righteousness. Well, Bildad, the second friend, steps up and returns, and he harshly upbraids Job. He says, how dare you disturb us with your reality? Don't you understand that relying on God to protect the innocent and punish the wicked is what helps us go on with our lives, our daily lives? And you have the nerve to say to us that maybe God isn't like that. God is a loving Father who will protect us. And when he chastises us, it is for our own good and because we deserve it. Bildad seems to be saying, don't try to tell us something different. We won't believe it. Kushner then, for several pages, he tells a remembrance or story about C.S. Lewis. I think perhaps most or all of you are familiar with the theologian, author, C.S. Lewis, Chronicles of Narnia, Screwtape Letters, etc. And there was a 1985 made-for-TV movie called Shadowlands. And it was an example of how life can overpower one's theology. In answer to a question on why God lets good people suffer, C.S. Lewis avowed that this is God's way of helping us become deeper, wiser, stronger people. Pain is the chisel the divine sculptor uses to shape us into the people he envisioned us as capable of being. Shortly thereafter, Lewis meets and eventually falls in love with an American woman, Joy Davidman, who inspired Lewis's book, Surprised by Joy, The Shape of My Early Life, which was published in 1931. However, a few years after they marry, Joy falls ill with bone cancer and eventually dies an agonizing, painful death. And Kushner, in his book, notes that Lewis now can no longer believe and teach that pain is the chisel God uses to perfect us, and acknowledges that the suffering of the righteous is a mystery beyond our understanding. In choosing the truth of real life over the comfortable illusion of traditional belief, C.S. Lewis does something Job's friends are incapable of doing. And as a kind of an aside here, Kushner, in one part of the book, also wonders, why are so many people bothered when bad people get away with murder than when good people suffer unjustly? He says he has lost count of the people who have urged him to write a book titled When Good Things Happen to Bad People. Wouldn't that be an interesting book? In chapter 19, Job responds to Bildad in an outburst that is more despairing than anything we have yet heard from him. This is no longer Job from Uz, the land of Uz, crying out. This is every man, everyone who has had a pleasant life snatched from him. And he pleads for a redeemer. And the word in Hebrew is goel, G-O'-E-L, goel. And the use of this term redeemer does not convey the meaning as it is in Christianity of Jesus and the notion of redeemer who saves souls from the punishment of hellfire. According to Kushner, a goel is a fixer, a person who sees something wrong, something that is unfair, and feels obliged to do something about it. In the biblical context, the concept of a goel as a redeemer has three shades of meaning. First, a goel can be an avenger. And we go back to Deuteronomy 19, verses 11 through 12. If someone murdered another person, a relative of the deceased was entitled to avenge the death by killing the murderer. This person was known as the Goel Hadam, that is, the blood avenger. And then biblical law further decreed that the killing must stop there. The murderer's relatives have no right to avenge themselves on the Goel, whose act was considered morally and legally justified. A Goel can, number two, a Goel can ransom family members. As described in the prophetic wisdom literature, the Nevi'im and the Ketuvim, but not in the Torah, in the Hebrew Bible, the Goel ransom members taken captive in war, or who had sunk so badly into debt that they had to sell themselves as indentured servants. And the third meaning of the Goel is a Goel can help poor landless individuals, as described in Leviticus. A Goel can redeem what his kinsman has sold and rescue them from poverty or dispossession. So thus, the Goel is someone who intervenes when an unjust or an intolerable situation has come about and takes on himself the responsibility for setting things right. It is to this dimension of God to which Job is appealing. Is it not your obligation, Job says to God, to atone for my children's death as their Goel and to extract me from my current situation as my Goel? And then finally, the third friend, Zophar, he's the youngest of the three friends, he offers his advice. And he admonishes Job not to envy the wicked. But upon hearing this, Job despairs. Instead of receiving consolation and sympathy from his friends, Job has heard only pious platitudes and warnings about what will happen to him if he continues to complain. So in desperation, as the second cycle of speeches draws to a close, Job breaks down and says, right now, I do envy the wicked. I would rather be an evil person living at ease with my family around me than to have suffer bereavement so that people will praise me at my funeral. And this, the second cycle of speeches ends. The friends have grown colder, they're more critical, and they're less sympathetic. And Job is driven to the edge of despair. Things will change soon. So that's the end of my little introduction to those series of readings. I guess, Reverend Sarah, if we could go off recording now.